Does Vivi really have Emu's will? If so, then how and why? Why does Vivi like this pose so much, and how will One Piece end? All of this and more coming right up, so let's get straight into it. You might have recently seen an ultra super mega series about this topic popping on YouTube, and if you haven't, then you know what to do. Make sure to click the link on the screen and go give it a watch. We're going to be touching on some similar topics here and definitively proving Vivi is a reincarnation of Emu's will, similar to Luffy with Joy Boy and Shirahoshi with Poseidon. You'll have enough evidence to convince anyone that this will be how the story ends, so drop a sub and we'll check out the spiciest connections first. After almost 1100 chapters, we still have yet to be given much information on the mysterious Emu. Probably the only real scene people think about is when Emu stands over the 3 cut-up posters while holding a picture of Vivi. Emu takes this picture to the throne and then provides the name of someone she wants eliminated to the Gorosei. Not long after this, Cobra is declared dead and newspapers claim Sabo is the culprit and Vivi is missing. This scene does demonstrate a significant connection between Vivi and Emu, hence why Oda showed us this strange sequence in the first place. Also, when you look at the 4 pictures involved, we see Blackbeard, Luffy, Shirahoshi and Vivi. We know Shirahoshi is Poseidon, we found out Luffy is Joy Boy in Wano, and we know Blackbeard has ties to ZORO. So surely this has to mean Vivi is connected to someone from the past too. Emu. But how do we know it's Emu that Vivi is connected to? Well, for starters, Emu is the one holding the picture and it's the only one undamaged. Additionally, Cobra dies soon after Emu requests someone's death, so it's more than likely the name Emu said was Cobra, which again ties back to Vivi as he's her dad. Emu could have done this to get Cobra out of the way after he began asking questions. We also see a connection with Rain. Ever notice how Vivi commanded the rain in Alabasta? Vivi has tons of ties to Rain, the spicy of which is probably these. Here we see what some claim is Vivi summoning the rain with her voice. We also have this really eerie panel where Vivi is fixated on the rain outside and even says to Igram she's watching the rain. Additionally, ever notice how it never rains on Marijois? Most of the community speculates that Emu has ties to water, the ocean or rain. I agree with this idea, and I believe she is responsible for flooding Wano, among other parts of the world. Personally, I think Emu did this after Joy Boy moved Pluton to Wano from Alabasta by using like a big version of the Rainmaker, or some ability to move the water from Alabasta to flood Wano, causing Alabasta to dry up. Interestingly, Rainbase was known as the City of Dreams, and Emu being connected to dreams is an idea that's been growing more and more in the community recently. Igram says to Luffy he dreamt Vivi had become the queen and saw her Jolly Roger with a crown as well. Both have had secret identities during the story. Emu is unknown to the world, and Vivi infiltrated Baroque Works as Miss Wednesday. Oda also gave us a hint with Vivi's name as well. Wednesday comes from the phrase Woden's Day. Woden refers to Odin, and Odin is the king of the gods and Asgard, which is a fitting name for a parallel to Emu. Furthermore, they're both royalty and members of the original 20 kingdoms, something we know celestial dragons care about. This connection is interesting because it could be that Eevee is required by Emu because of her lineage factor also. We know the Nefertari lineage is royalty and Emu could potentially be Nefertari herself, so Vivi could be a fitting successor in that sense too. The lineage factor could include the strange sort of abilities we see from both of them and might be the reason potentially why Emu kidnapped her in the first place. It gets even spicier though. Vivi is shown to have a strong sense of order and balance. Her will is noted to be strong, and we explicitly see Vivi's eyes when she apparently uses her ability, similar to what we saw with Emu in Lalesia. Then there's the age-old debate that Emu is female, and for me, after seeing Lalesia crossed off the map, there's no doubt that this is a female hand, belonging to either Emu or maybe even Vivi, considering Emu usually has a silhouetted or gloved hand, and it's not going to be a random character. So anyway, speaking of Lalesia, both characters have had to deal with rebellions during the story. For example, Emu is currently dealing with populations revolting all over the world. In Vivi's arc, we saw a war between her royals and a rebellion, so that's another connection there. But why would Vivi need to succeed Emu in the first place? I theorize Emu performed the perennial youth surgery on herself. The surgery is said to cause the operator to die. This can mean if you perform the surgery on yourself, then rather than sacrificing one's physical life, you sacrifice your will or soul, which is the life force of the One Piece world. Sacrificing your own will may prevent it from moving on naturally, like we hear about in CIPHER, which is where Vivi comes in. In the One Piece world, when someone's will dies, it's reincarnated into the world. similar to what we see with Joy Boy and Luffy. I believe Emu's will has been reincarnated in Vivi because of all the connections between the two, which we will continue looking at in a minute. Emu would need to retrieve her will in order to be whole again, which is foreshadowed by the butterflies in the Garden of Marijois, as butterflies represent transformation, you know, caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly. We can be sure Emu knows about such technology because we see her keeping the Straw Hat cold in the Marijois vault artificially. Living a long life and preserving will are prominent themes in One Piece, and we see old Kureha discuss it in drum, with the sakura petals that were indicating inherited will. Then what do we have here? Here, we see Vivi with sakura petals blowing past her, again indicating inherited will. Is Karu cutting out a picture of Luffy in the background there? And what balcony is this? Because there should be no cherry blossoms in Alabasta. This definitely creeps me out and could be suggesting Vivi and Emu are connected directly here, considering Emu has a cutout of Luffy's picture as well. Anyway, while we're on the subject of covers, what about this cover? Or this one, or this picture, or this one? Vivi seems to like balance just as much as Emu, right? We also see the Gorosei mention balance twice. It's crazy how many examples of this there are in the story, and it certainly counts as another parallel to Emu. In the cover for 423, we see Vivi sat on land with her feet in water. Otters are surrounding her, and otters live on both land and sea, similar to the seagulls that we see featuring there too. Also, we have watermelons, a fruit that grows on land and is known for being watery. It's even in the name. This cover is pretty explicit. It shows a balance between the land and the sea, with Vivi being a part of that balance, half and half. This cover does the same in a more subtle way, while also showing the future of Alabasta, I think. We have Luffy in the background enjoying the rain, holding the water containers from Alabasta, implying Alabasta is where this takes place. Interestingly, we see the rain and huge saplings growing from the ground, suggesting whatever is growing here will be giant trees perhaps, as we've seen. Importantly, we see a frog similar to this cover. Why is this important? Well, frogs are amphibians, again suggesting a balance of land and water. Here we see Vivi tending to the frog. You could argue she's healing the relationship between the land and the sea here. Also, I wonder if this frog foreshadows a prince, like from the fairy tales and stuff, and if so, who that would be. In chapter 823, Cobra makes it clear that he wants Vivi to marry, stating he has a stack of pictures of potential suitors. Vivi doesn't seem to care, and the conversation only lasts a single page. Oda seldom does things for no reason, it seems, so Cobra probably had a very good reason for wanting Vivi to marry. Maybe he had some idea that Emu was interested in her in some way. This cover page says bride in training. When you add that to the fact that we've seen Vivi being fitted for a wedding dress twice, we can see marriage is being suggested. Could it be Emu that wants to marry Vivi? Or Joy Boy perhaps? Considering recent imagery such as the new Vivre card design, I'm starting to believe Vivi and Luffy are tied to marriage in some sense, more so than Emu, most likely as a projection of Joy Boy and Emu's relationship years and years ago. There's plenty of examples of Luffy and Vivi paralleling Joy Boy and Emu, but for this video I'm just going to point out one I find really understated, one that most probably have forgotten about. I've speculated for a while that Joy Boy ties to whales and royalty, potentially of the ancient kingdom. Earlier in the story we saw Vivi enter a whale with a companion who was dressed as royalty. This is a bizarre scene and no doubt will be revealed to be a parallel to Joy Boy and Emu. Anywho, back to the covers. This one gives me an ominous feeling as well. Vivi is holding a filleting knife over a fish, which is of course a sea animal. It just happens to be kind of whale-shaped too. Her tongue is out, which we see with Luffy often when he's in his element, but we've also recently seen it with Stussy as she portrays CP0. Also, she stood next to Igaram's wife. Igaram being the character that dreamt she'd be the queen of pirates. Look at her apron, there you go. The symbol underneath is made of 3 elements, a heart, a cross, and the marine symbol. The heart implies a romantic or loving relationship, the cross I believe is Joy Boy's symbol, and the marine symbol is the Emu connection to the world government and navy. The marine symbol could actually be Emu's symbol originally, but I guess we'll have to find that out. Anyway, this suggests more freaky ties between Vivi and Emu, particularly with the filleting blade over the whale-shaped fish. Oh, this next cover is even weirder. We see an imitation of Vivi with a pretty evil expression and blank eyes in a wedding dress being carved out of wood. Wood in the One Piece world can store will or souls, so this cover depicts a copy of Vivi tying to soul and marriage because of the wedding dress. When you combine this with the fact that the eyes are considered the window of the soul, yet in this cover they are blank, and also the expression of the wooden's Vivi's face is kind of evil, I don't think it's a reach to say it's another abstract cover depicting Vivi and Emu's relationship in part. We got another cover here. We see Alabasta, but with a Japanese building in the background, which probably is a metaphor for Wano. What I want to focus on, however, are the red flowers. Where have we seen flowers? There you go, Emu's garden. What else do we see there? Tulips, but I'll touch on that in a minute. So maybe that explains who this sea serpent trying to woo Vivi with a flower is supposed to be. It does make sense, seeing as serpents represent rebirth because they shed their skin. We see a lot of princesses in the story with flowers in their hair. Interestingly, however, with Vivi, she only wears the flower in her hair when she's dressed regally, never when she dresses down. The flower is a red rose, and as we know, that sort of associates with romance or love. And this is when we go back to the tulips, because we also see Emu growing tulips, and tulip, the meaning of tulips is also deep love. So it's an interesting connection between the two there. This all could tie back into the relationship between Emu and Joy Boy, or Vivi and Luffy later on, and yeah, I guess we'll see more of that. Now, I want to show you one last cover. This doesn't actually add to the theory, but it's a cover that hit me pretty hard with emotion when I realized what was actually happening. And so I thought I'd share it with you guys. Here we have the Princess Vivi of Alabasta in a black dress with two frogs singing. Again, the frogs are amphibious, indicating the relationship between land and sea. And there are two, one either side of Vivi, showing us the relationship is balanced now. This is also personified by the plants we see, like water lilies, because it's a plant that grows above the water but lives on the water. A lily also represents death, and here we see Alabasta has had rain and it's not a desert anymore. Vivi is playing music, which is a way of communicating with the soul in One Piece. The instrument she's playing is a harp, which is symbolic for inner soothing or inner peace. The ruins in the background show the past is behind her. What's happening here is Vivi is soothing herself over the death of her father. Now the dawn has come and she has time to reflect. Tragic, poetic, and beautiful work from Oda. Overall, these covers suggest Vivi is to bring balance to the world against Emu, who is trying to retrieve Vivi's will. Karu also appears a little sus in these too, so maybe he plays a part in this somehow. There are a couple more other covers we could look at as well, but that's a little more meta. They tell more like narrative details. In this video, I was sort of more so looking at just this strong, creepy connection between Emu and Vivi, and just how many similarities they have. So in conclusion, I think the 20 kingdoms were formed by Emu and took down the ancient kingdom. This is when Emu discovered ties to Nika and advanced technology, such as inherited will and lineage factor. Emu then used the Opie or some other means, such as the Eve tree, to extend her own life at the cost of her soul. Next, she removed any traces of the events of that time she could find, in order to prevent the technology from being discovered by others. This period is known as the Void Century, in which Emu puts Joy Boy's hat in the freezer in order to prevent his will from reincarnating by keeping it frozen. Centuries later, Emu discovers the reincarnations of XEBEC or the Goro in Blackbeard, Emu in Vivi, Joy Boy in Luffy, and Poseidon in Shirahoshi, hence the panel. Emu then plans to destroy Joy Boy, XEBEC, and Poseidon once and for all and inherit Vivi's will, reuniting her body back with her soul, perhaps using another surgery. This is why Oda showed us Joy Boy kind of possessing Luffy, and Luffy's heart beating in the same rhythm as Joy Boy's beat, because Luffy too is a reincarnation, physically, mentally, and in terms of will, just as Vivi is Emu. Seeing as Luffy is a reincarnated Joy Boy, he'll attempt to liberate Vivi most likely, noticing Vivi is not acting within her character. This may be a repeat of events that happened roughly 800 or 900 years ago, however with a different outcome this time, I'm hoping. Luffy will attempt to save Vivi and in the process bring down the Red Line along with Marie Joie and Fishman Island. Before this, the Fishmen will have been evacuated by the Sea Kings on the Noah under the influence of Shirahoshi. Luffy will succeed in bringing an end to the world government as we know it, but it will be Vivi that will be the one to bring about balance. The global political system will be world democracy and a new reverie will reinstate order, creating a new and less chaotic system where people can finally be free. This is the birth of the new era and the dawn of the new world. Okay, so that's everything VIVIMU in a nutshell pretty much. I've no doubt missed some stuff, but I'm sure you'll let me know down in the comments. Big thanks as always for watching, and if you did make it this far, you've just won a free Tontata. Please like and sub, tell your mum to leave a comment, and I'll see you soon to discuss more about the 3 reincarnations and how that all ties together. Anyway, peace. Wait, the end of CIPHER polls here? Luffy and Lucci are teaming up? Saturn is in town? Whoa, did we miss something? Let's take a quick look at CP0. Stussy Vegapunked, Lucci rebelled, Kaku helping Luffy, Hattori pigeon sauce. Our predictions came true. So, how will CIPHER poll break up? And where's all this going? Let's get into it. So for us, this started a few months back, seeing the CIPHER poll's hat tilt, which really threw me off. Considering CIPHER poll agents seemed so obedient, it was almost like they'd been brainwashed. Why would they do something on such a personal level? This also made me wonder if Oda is actually planning on giving us more context and the backstory for the CIPHER poll agents. Now, there are a ton of them, so of course Oda can't cover all of them, but how about the main ones? We can probably get an outline from them guys. This immediately made me think of the classic theories around the children at Lamb's house becoming Cypherpol agents. With these small connections, I began to dig further. Next thing you know, we had predicted that on Egghead Island, Luffy and Lucci were going to team up, and that this would subsequently lead to the breakup of Cypherpol. So, now we've been vindicated, and Luffy and Lucci are teamed up. Let's look at what we think will happen next, and the significance of all this to the upcoming endgame. Okay, firstly, a speedrun of what Cypherpol actually is. Cypherpol's name is based on Interpol, which was set up in the 20s by 20 countries that saw an urgent need for communication between police across borders. Their uniform is a reference to the Gestapo, while their Venetian masks represent freedom traditionally. Not only did Interpol share its headquarters with the Gestapo during World War II, but it also officially operated as a division within the Gestapo secret police. I gotta be careful saying that word on YouTube. Okay, we'll come back to their appearance, but onwards with the theory. Now here's the connections we're already aware of, suggesting Cypherpol will soon come to an end. It was recently shown by Lucci that there appears to be Cypherpol ships missing since departing Egghead. We also just had this confirmed by Lucci. Majorly suggests Lucci was in fact asking about the missing ships himself, as opposed to receiving an order to do so. Lucci also ponders about Lalesia, which likely will become relevant soon. Lucci's knowledge of these events are peculiar, however the weirder thing is what actually happened to those ships. Well, we now know it was the Sea Beast that took them, and the agents on board are captured. By who, we don't know yet. Also, we see the captured Cypherpol agents imprisoned, which isn't exactly great for their morale as agents. Not only that, but we see them talking to Vegapunk, something that GOROSEI would likely not tolerate. Furthermore, Lucci disobeys a direct order. Again, this is something we haven't seen much of on such a blatant scale whilst agents are serving under Cypherpol, but there is no doubt Lucci actively does the opposite of what he was ordered, which is to not attack Luffy. Considering his earlier transgressions under the world government, there's no chance Lucci is going to be allowed back in CP0 after this. The same can probably be said for Stussy, who clearly has her own agenda. Do we really think if the GOROSEI found out she'd knocked out Kaku and Lucci, she'd be allowed to stay? Well, if they did find out, which is an if, then as Edison mentioned, she'd have to go on the run for being Vegapunk's ally, as well as for the betrayal. This might be a reach, but there might be another Cypherpol member connected to Vegapunk too. We recently saw Vegapunk's flowers during a couple cover stories, and by now I think we've all noticed he has a thing for arrows. Well, it just so happens Guernica wears this brooch, which is a flower with 3 arrows coming down. We have the face stitching too, which we now recognise is an indicator that people have had some sort of surgery or modification done, such as Weevil and Sentomaru. He also had a mask, which looks almost like a primitive version of Shaka's. We actually saw him without this mask also, so this is really bizarre stuff. As I say though, that I'm aware that's not much to go on, lol, so it is what it is. Anyway, this brings us up to date with 1076. Now we have Kaku, who agrees to team up with the enemy to take on Seraphim. Though we don't know who's controlling the Seraphim, there's no chance the world government is going to have Kaku just keep losing to the Straw Hats and then team up with them and then join CP0. It's just not going to happen. And if the world government are the ones controlling the Seraphim, then clearly Kaku is now being targeted by them anyway. To bring it full circle, we have the infamous hat tilt in Wano right before Kaido squished Guernica. Interestingly, a picture of Gear 5 Luffy was still sent to the Marines, suggesting he might not actually be as squished as we think. As I mentioned, the sign of affection is a surprise because the most we've seen these guys do together is drink tea. Anywho, you get the picture. So this little sign shows that these guys are pally. Not only this though, Guernica was ordered to complete a task that would almost certainly result in his demise. Awareness that their lives can be sacrificed, almost disposably, which may play a part in their motivation to rebel in the end. We already saw CP9 persecuted by Spandam for their total failure with Luffy, and maybe worst of all, losing Robin and Franky. From this we can assume that the relationship between the former CP9 members and the Cypherpol leadership is fragile. So now we've covered the basics, let's dig into the spice and have a deeper look to put context on all of this. Starting connections here. Now with the Big Mum Carmel backstory I mentioned earlier, we see Lamb's house with Mother Carmel as a parent figure of a group of distinct looking children. We also see Cypherpol meet with Carmel to recruit said children. Now as the old theories show, when you look at the Cypherpol members we've seen so far and compare them with the children of Lamb's house, you immediately see some uncanny connections. It looks almost as if the children we saw are the current Cypherpol members that are in the story. So maybe the child trafficking that Mother Carmel was doing was in order to provide Cypherpol agents with no backgrounds skills, parents, or other issues to deal with. Kaku speaks like an old person, but is shown to have a childish disposition, most recently when he talks about fighting a space monster in Egghead. This is a strange contrast, and I think it will tie in. Maybe Kaku was brought up by the Gorosei or someone like that, hence the old speech and loyalty to the Cypher Pole. Funnily enough, in real life, orphans have been recruited into agencies like this in the past, and are featured in classic spy characters such as James Bond. Big Mum was also a child at Lamb's house, who went on to be manipulated by Strausen and his agenda. This is ironic if the Cypher Pole agents originally do come from Lamb's house, as it parallels what happened to them. It's possible Carmel didn't want Big Mum becoming a Cypher Pole agent, as she was too powerful, which would increase the world government's threat enormously. We currently know Big Mum's alive from the torn up VIVIMU card on the page, so she's likely to come back in the story soon in my opinion, and this is when we get the rest of the exposition, I believe. I am aware, not everyone is aware that Puddin did that VIVIMU card thing, but there it is. Okay, so it's possible these children are then given powers, which is why we see so many Cypher Pole agents have zone abilities. Wondering what a failed attempt at making a Cypher Pole agent looks like? Well, the prison guards are likely zones that have been consumed by the will of their fruit, like Vegapunk talks about. Where better to put them than Impel down, and manipulate their minds to guard the prison levels, which I'll touch on in a sec. How though? Devil fruits? Maybe celestial dragon tech? Or perhaps it's something that's passed down? The O'Hara flashback confirmed to us that relatives of Cypher Pole agents can also be in Cypher Pole, including fathers and uncles. We still don't know why this is the case, but it's certainly interesting and suggests there may be a system in place for selecting Cypher Pole agents that involves lineage or family or something like that. We know that's big in the One Piece world. Narratively though, I think we're going to see different stages of control over the zone powers that were given to them, with Kaku having a particularly strong awakening, and Hattori actually being a zone user that's an even bigger threat than the others. Morgan's is a zone that we are yet to see in human form, and he also wears human clothes signifying the human side of him, which does remind me of Hattori. And when you think about it, he does know some sus information, so it is possible that maybe back in the day he was involved in Cypher Pole or an original agent or something, but that's another thought or theory. Also, for those interested, check out the current Conversations in Parvision's Discord server about how Hattori is Lafitte, which I'll link below. The connections are undeniable. I'm struggling to resist it myself. Let's not forget who's who as well. He's a former member of Cypher Pole with zone abilities. In previous videos, for example, our last one, I've speculated that God Valley may have been a place where these kind of experiments or where these procedures went on, where these people were given their powers. Or maybe other experiments like I've spoken about before, K and off Roger's heirs. I briefly touched earlier on how Cypher Pole agents seem brainwashed. Well, they might be in this sense. To clarify, I theorise the Cypher Pole agents are recruited from a young age from Lamb's house specifically. There are other examples of similar buildings with ties to children being experimented on also, but I'll touch on that in an upcoming video. I think Lucci was likely offered his awakening in order to rejoin Cypher Pole and accepted, motivated by his want for revenge on Luffy, and Django may have used his abilities, manipulating him and other agents to ensure their loyalty. That said, seeing Luffy was probably enough to break the hypnotism, which is when we see Luffy start disobeying orders immediately and following his own agenda. This is why we got such a quick reveal of Lucci's zone power-up. It's not actually about power, his power is incidental. It's really about Lucci as a character, as well as the fact that he's a complete contrast of Luffy. I mean, their names are almost the same. We have recently seen Lucci had a significant power-up, characterised in a similar way to Luffy's Gear 5. Also, Kaku, who has shown a strong kick whilst in human form, while it seems meaningless, could actually be intentional by Oda. Kaku's awakening may be far crazier than Lucci's, and so Oda's sort of saving that one for after. Considering the reasons stated, it's safe to assume CP0 is no more, which will bring an end to the slave and child trafficking, among other things currently handled by Cypher Pole. Sword may be reintroduced as a replacement system, which would perfectly reflect how the formation of the United Nations happened in real life. Interestingly, also, the UN troops are called Blue Berets, and in Skypiea we saw that their police were called White Berets, and let's face it, we all know whatever happens in Skypiea is a microcosm of the One Piece world. Luffy and Lucci will go on to be best friends, and psych, just joking, don't worry. Lucci will give his life to take down Cypher Pole, liberating the other agents, which will be how Oda parallels Luffy's character with him. Remember also, Cypher Pole work directly under the world government and the Gorosei, and are connected to the Tenryubito, meaning that they are part of the actual strength that makes up the world government, so this is a huge loss for them in terms of power. Welcome back, pirates and theorists, to another exciting episode of OPM. Today we're delving into the enigmatic connections between two seemingly distant characters, Dr. HIRLUK and the notorious ROKS captain XEBEC. Could there be a link between these two figures from different eras in the One Piece world? Let's set sail into this intriguing theory and find out. Don't forget to like, sub, and give it a share if you find this interesting. It really helps the channel. We all remember the emotional journey of HIRLUK, the passionate doctor from Drum Island who believed in the power of a cherry blossom's bloom and sought to create a cure for all diseases. His ideals and aspirations struck a chord with many fans, but could there be more to his story than meets the eye? As we dive into the vast history of the One Piece world, we encounter the legendary ROKS pirates, led by the fearsome ROKS captain XEBEC. Their ambition to overthrow the world government shook the world, and their disbandment marked a pivotal moment in history. But what if there's a hidden connection between these two seemingly unrelated narratives? Here's where the theory takes a strange turn. What if HIRLUK, in his quest for a universal cure, stumbled upon some sort of knowledge of XEBEC at God Valley? We've seen in the One Piece world that seemingly unconnected events often tie together in unexpected ways to give us a reveal. HIRLUK'S unconventional approach to medicine and his relentless pursuit of a cure for the heart might have led him to uncover fragments of lost history, linking back to the era of XEBEC. Could it be that his study or accidental discovery was a crucial piece in understanding the secrets of what the world government is so desperate to keep hidden? HIRLUK saw something that cleansed his soul the same year as the God Valley incident in the West Blue. Furthermore, HIRLUK mentions that someone dies when their name is forgotten. XEBEC's name was forgotten at the God Valley incident. It's possible it was XEBEC that HIRLUK saw at God Valley. After all, HIRLUK also discussed with Dalton the idea of a country inheriting its will, and God Valley is a nation that no longer exists. Recently, we heard another case of the world government distorting the truth to fit their narrative with Kuma's flashbacks. On top of all the other examples of them doing this, it makes me think that when they say XEBEC attacked slaves at God Valley, it was in fact the other way around. I believe that the slaves may have rebelled against the Celestial Dragons. We saw the Celestial Dragons themselves were hunting the slaves before XEBEC even turned up, so they couldn't have too much of an issue if it was true that XEBEC did attack the slaves. Nika inspired and liberated slaves for the ages as far as we know. It could be that XEBEC was a Nika archetype and in fact inspired the slaves to revolt against their oppressors. During this process, HIRLUK may have seen XEBEC become a martyr, which would explain why he would go on to blow himself up in a statement against the governing forces of Drum Island. As I mentioned, HIRLUK discussed the logistics of a country's will being inherited with Dalton, and it just so happens that God Valley disappeared off the map, which alludes to the fact that it may be the case that the will of God Valley is actually inside a character within the One Piece story. HIRLUK'S will went on to be inherited by Chopper, the user of the Hito Hitonomi. This could very well tie into XEBEC's powers also, particularly considering Blackbeard went to Drum for unknown reasons. We also saw Kuma travel the world looking for a doctor, echoing HIRLUK'S journey in the West. But the reason why I bring this up is for some reason Kuma didn't visit Drum when he was looking for a doctor. Seems strange considering its reputation. Maybe this ties into whatever incident happened between HIRLUK and XEBEC at God Valley and Kuma knowing about it. While the theory might seem far-fetched, Oda is known for weaving and intricately telling a story with unrelated threads that turn into a grand tapestry. Could HIRLUK'S pursuit of a cure be tied to the lost history of XEBEC and the ROKS pirates? As always, it's just a theory and the true answer lies within the unfolding pages of Oda's magnum opus, One Piece. Anyway, thank you for joining us on this brief, spicy voyage through the world of One Piece theories. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. We've got some more coming up, some very quick 5-minute theories and some bigger half an hour to 40-minute videos, so keep an eye out for all that. Until next time, keep theorizing and enjoy the epic adventure of One Piece. If you've made it this far, you've just won a free Lapan. So let me know where you'd like him delivered, and don't forget to feed him. And much love, bye bye bye. Did you know Django's epithet is the turncoat? Did you know Django ate a mushroom that grew off his chin and gained him powers? Did you know Django is the only pirate to have his bounty officially removed? One Piece is a world full of incredible abilities and powers, and today I'm going to talk about one of them. But before that, let me explain to you how we got here. For those who haven't followed our previous theories, we dropped one a couple of months ago about the end of CIPHER. During our time working on it, we found some interesting patterns that seem to connect to hypnosis. Hypnosis is probably one of the most interesting and yet underrated abilities in the One Piece universe. In this video, we will explore the concept of hypnosis in the One Piece world and examine the characters who can use it and how they use it. We will also discuss the inspiration that Oda had behind hypnotism and how it compares to the way hypnosis is utilized in the One Piece story. So like, sub, and prepare to be hypnotized by the last arc. Before anything else, let's define Oda's version of hypnosis through the character that is used to introduce it, 1-2 Django. After waking up, Django ate a mushroom that had grown off his chin and developed the ability to influence or control others through his hypnosis. He found the taste disgusting. With this information, it seems to be a will or desire-based ability similar to a devil fruit, eating something that has connection to dreaming and tasting bad. Also, Django once stated to Full Body in a cover story that he could manage something as complex as erasing all memory of an individual from another's mind. This suggests, with better proficiency, someone could actually remove themselves in this way from someone's memory. So let's do a quick dive into a certain book and movie that seems to have partly inspired hypnosis in One Piece. This is A Clockwork Orange. Like I said, when we were working on the Cypher Pole theory, we found some interesting information that leads back to hypnosis that deserved a deeper dive. A Clockwork Orange is a classic dystopian novel by British author Anthony Burgess. It is set in a future society where youth gangs roam the street committing acts of extreme violence and mayhem. After being arrested, Alex, who's the leader of a gang and the main character of the story, is subjected to an experimental hypnotic treatment designed to cure him of his violent tendencies. The treatment, known as Ludovico technique, involves conditioning him to feel sick and nauseous at the sight of violence. Without spoiling too much of the story, there's a backlash which results in Alex being offered a great job for the government, hush money, and even a public status. What's interesting is the idea of free will in that novel. In that world, the freedom of individuals to make choices becomes problematic when those choices undermine the safety and stability of society. And in Clockwork Orange, the state is willing to protect society by taking away freedom of choice and replacing it with prescribed good behavior. How does this connect back to One Piece? Well, as we were researching the Cypher Pole agents, we found similarities between the idea of conditioning people to the world government's agenda. Alex was a psychopath who was capable of extremes. He was excessively cruel and violent and was able to mask it by being calm and smiling, while wearing a black top hat and at times a cane, which connects to both Lucci and Lafitte, one of Blackbeard's 10 Titanic captains. The interesting twist is that Lafitte used to be a policeman, and Alex's friends who betrayed him went on to become police officers. Another character that ties here is Corazon, who actually wears Alex's eye makeup. The interesting thing here as well is that Alex was brainwashed through sounds and images via like classical music. And Corazon had the Nagi Nagi no Mi, also known as the Calm fruit, which allows the user to create a soundproof field and to cancel out all the noises. This would have been the specific fruit that Alex would have benefited from. What's even more intriguing though is that both Corazon and Lafitte have something that ties them together. Corazon was introduced in the Dressrosa arc, and even though Lafitte wasn't, Burgess was, another one of the 10th Titanic captains. Now, why is that relevant? Well, Burgess is the name of the author of A Clockwork Orange. So maybe that's a little nod from Oda, but we'll have to see. Additionally, there's a One Piece movie called Clockwork Island. Now, this is where hypnosis comes into play in a big way, and it connects the final moment in the movie, A Clockwork Orange. Due to the public perception of Alex, he was offered a job and status as it would help the government to regain a good image, even though the state is close to anarchy. Alex's friends never went through the treatment and were able to continue to act on their cruel impulse as they became police officers who worked for the government, further decaying the society. I believe that the world government has a means to influence certain people to fall in line. With Django's hypnosis, it's possible for someone to make a person completely forget who they are. We know that Django was involved in recruiting people like working under Hina, and Hina also talks in third person. So all of that there is just sus to begin with. But back to the point. There's a theory released by a couple of friends of this community, Daya, Regulus, and Tachi Spins, that talked about how through Dendem Mushi we were introduced to frequency in One Piece that some can access, hence why the Dendem Mushi take the caller's appearance. It's all about frequency. Everything in the One Piece world has its own frequency. People who use hypnosis are able to influence people by affecting their frequency. What's even more interesting is that 4 of the 5 canon characters known for their hypnotism are all connected by the arts. Django, he's a hypnotist who uses a pendulum as a medium, but is also a dancer. Mariana utilizes her unique skills as a painter to employ a special type of hypnosis based on colored paint. Lafitte, even though there's still mystery shrouding the character, he's seen to use hypnotism and is also a tap dancer. Brook is a musician that controls people's moods through his music, and as we know, music's very powerful in terms of connecting with the dead and the soul in One Piece. Even though each method of hypnosis is different, they all have a similar effect. So sound, images, movement enables them to influence other people and their actions, and the different mediums most likely affect different frequencies, but as I say, however, on a whole, generate a similar effect. In One Piece, we could probably define hypnotism as the desire to influence another person's mind or body by affecting their will, by tapping into its frequency. In Fishman Island, Brook revealed that he has refined his musical skills to the point where he could completely change the mood and effectively hypnotize his opponents to believe that they were at a festival. Something we also see with Uta in film Red. This is further evidenced by the 2 explanations of observation haki that would now make more sense. The first was with Ganfall back in Skypiea. He calls it the ability to listen to various sounds that a person's body makes. The second was Rayleigh during Luffy's training, who explains that being attuned to someone's emotions makes you capable of sensing another person's actions. It's all about how certain people interact with other frequencies, or even their own. Some use it to affect themselves with their haki, or affect others through the means of abilities like hypnosis. With this definition, we can see a lot of other abilities display similar effects. Perona's Horonomi allows her to create ghosts that can manipulate people's emotions and thoughts. Sugar's Hobby allows her to turn people into toys and erase their memories. She can also use hypnosis to control the toys she's created. Caesar Clown's Gasu Nomi allows him to create hallucinatory gas that can make enemies inadvertently fight each other, showing again a version of influence. But let's bring this back to the world government and how it all ties in. Even though Oda calls it hypnosis, the idea is aimed more towards general influence, which the world government, as we know, carries out by manipulating history and facts. We've already seen a failed version of these experiments with awakened zone jailers, we believe, who were put in Impel Down to be forgotten and ignored by history, essentially. Also, on top of that, recently we saw CP0 arrive at Egghead to dispatch a Vegapunk, only for the government to try and dispatch them while they were there too, which again is an example of the world government scrubbing their history and manipulating the facts. There's a scene, this is indicative of some sort of control, or also known as hypnosis. Even though the subject is not 100% sold on the idea, they're still completely complying nonetheless. We believe there are those who follow and don't actually ask questions, like Kaku, which might tie into the fact he speaks in an old man's dialect. And on the other hand, we have those like Rob Lucci that need influencing due to their unruly nature. That was the whole point of the government in Clockwork Orange. They believed in freedom as long as you fell in line. If not, they believed in prescribed good behaviour. The world government brainwashed people who don't fall in line. Again, back to Clockwork Orange, Alex got a job in the government to fix the public image that took a huge hit due to his case leaking out to the public. Now, what if I told you that the person at the centre of the world government is in fact a painter? I think you all know who I'm talking about, but that's all I'm going to share for this bit. I'm going to tie this into the God Valley Part 2 theory, which is what happened at God Valley. So I'm sorry to tease you with that, but I'd love to take a quick second to thank a couple of people who were great helping in the making of this idea. So huge love to Tachi and Daya. That's Tachi Spins and Daya Regulus, who have some really cool stuff going on at the moment. Check out their Blazed Attorneys. You'll probably see us on there soon once we break down the time zones. Keep an eye out for collabs and TLA streams in the future, and we'll make sure you're subbed to all of us. Keep safe, keep sane, and peace. This video covers Franky's parents and their connections to Mads. It's possible Mads were likely a pirate crew, or at the very least a fleet, and we're going to be exposing some of their secrets in this video. So make sure to like and subscribe for free tickets to Karmaland. Anyway, let's go. Franky came from the technically advanced South Blue via reverse mounting at 4 years old, roughly 30 years ago. Exactly 30 years ago before the present day in One Piece is the year 1492, which in real life is when America was discovered by Columbus. There are plenty of connections to America through Franky, such as what we see with the hamburgers and fashion sense, etc. But we'll focus on that another time. So if you think there is a deeper reason for Franky's connection to America, let me hear your thoughts down in the comment section. I'll make sure to include them in the next video. But anyway, on with Franky's history. Franky was the 7th member to join the crew, which ironically happened at Waters 7, the island of shipwrights. He was found on the scrap island by Tom when he was a 10-year-old kid, assuming he'd been abandoned by his pirate parents. Tom saw him using a cannon that he'd fashioned from scraps lying around. This is something most kids would not be able to do. Also, the cannon was not a typical cannon either. As you can see, it has a very strange design or appearance. It looks like the design was influenced by the fact it was made from scraps. From observing Franky's mechanical and technical prowess and adding the fact he was thrown overboard near Water 7, builds a case that Franky spent his childhood around technology, potentially an advanced pirate ship with his parents. We see evidence of this in the cannon he made, and we also saw his love for weapons technology again recently when Franky saw Vegapunk's beast mechs. He appears to have these advanced skills before becoming an apprentice for Tom, who then trained him to be a shipwright. It's worth noting that Tom's abilities lay strictly in boat building, and he was not particularly known for any particular radical science. Obviously he's been involved in some stuff, but that wasn't his forte. It was Franky who has been shown to have more of a focus on weaponry. Overall, you could say he fused his own knowledge with what Tom taught him, resulting in the battle Frankies. As we can see by the designs, we did not see Tom teach him any of this weaponry or technology. If you look a little closer, you can also see each battle Franky is numbered, another trait he has independent of what Tom taught him, a theme we see with many MADS members' scientific creations such as Vegapunk's satellites. Some of the more obvious examples are Judge and the Germa and Caesar's experiments. You got the pacifistas as well. A few cases some may have missed, however, are Water 7 with the numbers stated pretty plainly on the outside of each dock, and we know the city was built over a previously destroyed one. In some shots we also see a 5 and a 6, which is the Gomu, and also in one of the panels there's Doom written above that. This might also tie into Wano, seeing as Wano is made up of 7 islands. The giant numbers are also in Wano, failed experiments whose name also act as their number. Kinda weird how Franky's home is similar to the Shogun's palace too, right? But anyway, back to the point. By looking at these numbers we can see a connection to MADS. We can even look at other characters, for example Dr. Hobback, since he was a genius scientist and he numbered his creations. Additionally, there's a connection between Franky and MADS through Queen. We see Franky and Queen do similar poses on this volume cover, and the name of some of their moves do match. They also have the same blood type, and we've not really seen them interact in the story yet, so maybe Oda is saving that for some MADS reveals later. Other recent characters we can look at are Stussy and Dufeld. In the chapter 1069 cover story, we see how the MADS fleet was potentially being funded by the underworld, in this particular case with Lufeld as the benefactor. Only a chapter prior in 1068 we saw Stussy apparently reminiscing about the past and being familiar with Vegapunk's technology, particularly his traps, while also respecting Vegapunk's genius and skill, implying they have an established relationship already. By the way, remember this panel? In the attempt of taking the Tama tobacco, she kills Lufeld and says, "My dumb dead friend." This familiarity suggests she was once friends with him in the underworld as well, or at least knew him. So you can see it's possible Stussy too is connected to MADS, and knew Dufeld because he was directly funding the group. Franky also has ties to this underworld. That's where Franky got the Adam Wood to build the Sunny. Anyway, MADS member Vegapunk probably has the strongest connections to Franky out of all of them. For example, the star symbol on Franky's arm. Franky is often wearing a shirt with one, and it could be found on his technology too. This could be a nod to Vegapunk, as we've recently seen stars on his work, like with the holographic dragon and the seraphim. We saw that Vegapunk uses the same star in some of his creations, right? Which is kind of like his trademark. Why do I say that? Well, the word Vega is the name of a real-life star, the biggest in the constellation of Lyra. This constellation has one main star with several satellites, similar to Vegapunk. Also, the suffix punk ties to punk themes we see across MADS, like their designs and dress. Why is this significant to Franky though? Well, because those stars appeared on Franky's arm after he used the scraps found on the ship to rebuild his body, suggesting it was Vegapunk's scraps he used. This might all be tied to Franky's inherited will, hence why Franky was sent to Karakuri during the time skip. Also, peep this, Oda is really inspired by Akira Toriyama's work, Dragon Ball, and actually owes his success with Shonen Jump to him. After all, it was Akira who told Shonen Jump to take on Oda after already refusing his work. I recently started a rewatch and I couldn't help but notice some similarities. Both Franky and Bulma have the blue hair, both of them have a very advanced knowledge towards building machinery and technology, both of their creations have numbers on. Both of them have this relationship with an old genius inventor, Franky with Dr. Vegapunk and Bulma with her dad, Dr. Breath, both of whom are doctors by the way. Both of these old dudes made legendary inventions. Vegapunk with Lineage Factor, Dr. Brief with his capsules. Early on in the series, Bulma was wearing a jacket with a star on too, so you can see what I'm saying by now for sure. Back to the theory though, through the One Piece story you can see many connections between Franky and Mads. Before all this, we saw in the story that Franky attempts to stop the sea train from transporting Tom to Eni's lobby, something you would assume is impossible for a normal human. But something interesting does happen. He actually managed to stop the train for a moment. A pretty insane feat, especially without dying. Sees a ship appearing next to him. It's a very strange, technologically advanced ship. We can even see dials similar to what we've seen in Nell's cover story in the moon. Also, look how Franky mentions his body. He talks about it being hot, like he's overheating, and he also compares his body to wasted machinery. He states, "Useless body of mine," which is further evidence Franky was already part machine. And furthermore, this chapter is called Reactivate, or in some versions, Resurrection. Why would such a strange and technological ship be so conveniently near Franky when he was about to die? Well, maybe because this was one of the ships of the Mads fleet. A ship that could have even carried the Mads crew at one point. Sounds crazy, but check this out. Look at the aesthetics of the ship. It looks very advanced, almost Vegapunk-like, and it looks similar to the ship that we see in the cover page of 1069, titled All Things Are Brought Into This World with Hope, possibly suggesting that Franky was born or made on this ship from a specific place for him. If that was the ship where he grew up, it would make sense why Oda would include this sentiment. A ship like this would require profound technological skill and knowledge. As I mentioned earlier, being chased by the world government for illegal experiments is very pirate-like behaviour, and a ship is the perfect way to constantly keep evading the world government, and stay on the move at the same time. Right, let's quickly look at other members of the Mads fleet, and it will soon become clear this seems to be common already. So you got Queen's ship, you got Caesar's ship, which is a super interesting design, and you've got German's 66 ship, which escaped the witch hunt. Also, look at what Mads was researching around the same time. We found out the research team were lawless, a pirate trait for sure, and were working on research and development of high-tech weaponry. Strange considering that's Franky's speciality, even as a kid. And look at what they discovered while they were on that ship. The blueprints to life itself. A living organism's lineage factor. The same thing that Judge used on Sanji and his brothers to make them modified humans. Franky might have been their first time experimenting on a human with the lineage factor. Franky may have originally even been born or made on that ship. So bearing in mind Franky has no medical knowledge, I think the reason Franky managed to do what he did on this particular ship was because he was already a modified human. Maybe even modified by similar technology to what we see on the boat. So when Iceberg says Franky's crazy to the core, he could actually be pretty on point with that. We also see Den foreshadowing this when he asks Franky if one of his ancestors was also a robot. Also, the cover to chapter 548 shows different scientific creations and inventions, and Franky is on there too. He's the only person on there, which, you know, it's a big hint from Oda. To tie all this together, let's look at the timeline. Franky was found in 1498 when he was 10 years old, after which he lived in Water 7's scrapyard. I think it's possible Franky was abandoned at Water 7 by his parents deliberately, probably to protect him from being discovered by someone such as the world government. Found by Tom, someone who curiously has a symbol on his shoulder, matching symbols in the story we've seen so far relating to the 8 kingdoms. Also, later on in the story, Franky is saved by what I think is a Mads ship, guided by either a Klabauterman or a VIVIMU powered sort of technology that guides itself to Franky whenever he's close to dying. Klabautermans have ties to ships, and ships have ties to Water 7, so the fact this happens, Vegapunk went to Ohara 22 years ago, which we discovered recently in a flashback, which by the way occurred right as CP0 arrived at Egghead to suppress knowledge. Franky's backstory just so happens to also be set 22 years ago, and again triggered by CP9 going there to suppress knowledge. This is a really nice parallel between the two arcs and kind of ties in Franky and Robin's backstories also. We also see this again on this page in chapter 490, where only they told something about their origins back to back as well, so there's likely more to their relationship, particularly when you include Tom's fear of a girl from Ohara and his brother Den being a sea forest researcher with clover tattoo and logo on his body, possibly being tied to Ohara. We are seeing a lot of backstories from characters coming from the South Blue recently, and I believe we'll have some big lore drops coming soon. Stussy, Kuzan, Sol, Franky, Kid, Bonnie, Kuma, Lindbergh, all of them lot for example. Anyway, thank you for watching, don't forget to like and sub and leave a comment, show some love.
Do you think Kid's a bozo? Are you hyped up about Shanks being a Chad? You're in the right place. Come get triggered at how Kid will start climbing the stairs of greatness and how Shanks will get squished by the end of this story. Welcome back, peeps. Today we have something nutty to talk about. There's been a major One Piece chapter which it'll impact how pretty much all of us experience Shanks and Kid's journey from here on in. You might have thought Shanks just finished Kid, and believe me, I don't blame you. Kid got annihilated, but he's not just coming back. Soon it'll be the first day of the rest of his life and his story. Stick around until the end of the copium. It helps a lot. Like and sub, and let's get into this. So, just like the Phoenix with his jaggy red hairstyle and his red feathery coat, he will rise up and come back stronger than ever. Phoenixes represent a figurative death and rebirth, like we've just seen with Kid's crew. So we're going to look at all the big hints Oda's left us so far and theorize when he's going to be back around and what his final form will look like. We've got two kind of similar characters here. Shanks and Kid both have red hair, scars on their left eyes, and a missing arm. One lost an arm betting on the future, the other one by hanging on to the past. Additionally, they both demonstrate Conqueror's Haki, which is no small feat. There's some mystery about the childhood of both of them as well, and despite the fact Shanks doesn't appear to know Kid well, Kid certainly knows Shanks, which leads me to why Kid's not finished. As we know, Kid got completely destroyed, and slander is at an all-time high. But why does he have such a bad rep? Many of you are probably laughing right now, but it's a legitimate question to ask, because unlike other characters, Kid has always been thought of as a major character. You could almost call him the big three of the worst generation, or at least someone that plays a bigger role. But so far, we've only seen L's from him, right? As the year passes, more and more people start believing he's just gonna fail, and that Oda's using him as spare parts. It was also stated that Oda planned to kill half the supernovas, so again, stuff like this does add fuel to the fire. The faith in Kid slowly but surely fades, and yet here I am, here to convince you that this is all a big setup since the beginning, and from now on we will see the development of Kid's story and the character in full. After all, he was paired to be Luffy's rival, and was shown to slowly start trusting Luffy. Kid's fixated on Shanks for some reason, giving us another clue he's not done yet. Interestingly, Kid's still yet to properly show his conquerors. His base stats and his potential are actually insane. If he'd mastered Haki, he'd easily bosh Big Mum around all sorts, right? You can get triggered in the comment. We saw Shanks did not expect to be so powerful, which is what caused him to rush into action. Anyway, it also might be important that in this latest chapter we had a panel where Shanks said, "Oh, so he's from the South Blue?" Potentially implying he'd been there or done something there a long time ago. Could this be the reason why Kid's so fixated on Shanks? Kid showed disinterest in Big Mum generally, so it does highlight how Kid's so focused on Shanks. Overall, Kid's behavior indicates that he's not a bad guy, but seemingly is still hanging on to his past. He still makes bad decisions because of the trauma. We've seen Oda address this throughout the story, which I'll get into in a minute. Shanks taught Luffy about picking your battle. We see this when Barto tries to provoke Luffy, and Luffy responds that it's not a battle worth fighting. This is in contrast to Kid, who doesn't understand the lesson, and instead pays the expensive price every time he tries it. In Wano, Kid ended up in Udon prison. The fact that they were in Udon, though, is hugely spicy in itself, because the food Kid and Killer hate is curried udon after their traumatic experience with Victoria. I believe this ties into what we saw in 1079. For example, the ship being split in half represents Kid splitting from his past, as the ship's name itself is Victoria as well, after their childhood friend who was killed by a rival gang, so there's definitely trauma going on. Additionally, he was submerged in water, representing the classic baptism motif, the end of a journey and beginning of another. This could even be why Oda called him Kid, and now he's got to come back as a man metaphorically, which would tie into the real life Kid's widely debated baptism in real life as well, which is interesting. Ironically, the real William Kid also had quite a traumatic upbringing around sort of the death of his father and stuff like this, so it's interesting stuff. Previously, we saw Kid, Killer, Heat, and Wire as bosses of 4 different gangs, linked by a punk theme. We can imagine the kind of behaviour he grew up around, for example, demonstrated by his love for weaponry. It also parallels the scrapyard in Goa that Luffy and Sabo grew up in. Growing up in that environment led Kid to become protective of his friends, earning him a position as like the big bro, or a captain you could say. This might be where he gets the epithet from. Anywho, this is all to say that those kids were living in a rough... I theorise despite Shanks not knowing about Kid, Kid knew about Shanks after Shanks' actions resulted in like the rough environment that Kid grew up in. This may be why Kid has such a grudge and seems obsessed with Shanks. It's no coincidence the first time he lost an arm, he didn't even see Shanks, and on the second time, he didn't have a chance to even open his mouth before getting one-shotted. It's as if Oda is not allowing them to talk, possibly because this will happen in the future, and we can then develop a better understanding of Shanks' actions and motivations. We do have Elbaf coming up as well, so it's likely to happen there if anywhere, right? Some may have also forgotten Kid's base. Interestingly, we last heard a Rouge and Balloon terminal were floating above it. Magnetism is an integral property in the One Piece story, as we know, with pirates using it for different ways of navigation, battles, and potentially even the use as a power source. Balloons and static are affected by magnets, but while this makes sense, what does it mean? Well, I doubt Oda will leave this knot untied, and Kid's base is actually very close to where we are on the map at the moment. In fact, Kid's base is one of the last points before Lodestar, so I'm thinking it's coming up alongside Arouge as well. Furthermore, let's not forget, so long as Kid doesn't die, he still holds the power of his fruit. A fruit that is, like, super significant in a place like Egghead, for example. It would just absolutely murk. Anywho, hold Kid in your mind for now, because I'll come back to him in a sec, but I want to quickly give Killer a rundown. Killer is another reason why the crew will come back. He was from the South Blue, similar to Saul, which is interesting because Saul was a D, but not from Elbaf. This location the two share is spicy AF because Killer talked about the man marked by flames, and Killer himself was also burned. Additionally, Killer is 25 and Nika Robin 30. The O'Hara incident happened when she was 8, making Killer 3 at the time. What if Killer was from O'Hara and he was saved by Saul in the midst of all the destruction? He only remembers this giant dude marked by a flame, who he saw salvaging all these books. So it makes sense that they would get closer to the One Piece if they located him. Killer was sent to the South Blue, and similar to Robin, had a rough childhood living in the scrapyard where he bonded with Kid, as I said earlier. A Three-Eyed Tribe member being in O'Hara wouldn't be so strange considering the best archaeologists gathered there, and there's ties to poneglyphs. This is all to say that Sol and Killer may be tied, and we have yet to see it revealed. Killer has this scar on his right arm and a burn mark. Furthermore, we've seen Killer with the poneglyph rubbings and talk about related lore. This reflects Robin's position in the Straw Hats crew, both doing their job as archaeologists and historians. If Killer was a resident of O'Hara when the Buster Call landed, but somehow wasn't able to get onto a ship in time after the whole incident with Saul, Robin, and Nikiji happened, then maybe after Saul defrosted and started saving the books, he found Killer. Killer got his scar on his arm during the midst of all this, but I think Saul managed a way to save him, maybe with his old raft or something like that. Killer was sent away in a similar fashion to Robin and found himself on an island where possibly a lot of like other orphans and people like that were. That's where, as I said, he meets Kid and where they form the crew, which is a band of like misfits, similar to what we see in Carmel's Sheep's House actually. This would explain the deal with his personality, no parental figures, and his tight bonds with his crew. As he experienced living in a harsh environment, he learned to only care about his friends and went on to support Kid in his journey for the famous One Piece treasure. Either way, I think it's where Shanks may be involved. I think maybe Shanks indirectly caused Killer to be in this situation, just like Kid and maybe some of the other kids, which would explain Killer's support of Kid's hate for Shanks, swearing on his life, very literally, that he would take him down. Now, let's take a closer look at Shanks' part in this. In 1079, we saw Elbaf being called Warland Elbaf. The fleet under Shanks was noted to contain a lot of weak people who are granted protection under Shanks' flag. Shanks tells his fleet to come back because he doesn't want them to get hurt. Makes sense. As we see throughout, he has a really close relationship with his crew, and the people in the street sort of holler and hug at him as he walks past. There's a mixture of different races and people in the chapter highlighting Shanks' like indiscriminate nature and his widespread travels. Shortly after, he asks if Kid's wounds from Wano have healed, a huge nod to the fact Shanks is ensuring Kid can handle a battle without dying. There is also a panel which is very interesting. On first inspection, this panel doesn't say much, but given the context, it might imply that Shanks did something there a long time ago, or the South Blue is significant to him in some way, hence the words he uses. But as soon as Shanks sees the future where Kid is about to attack his dear friends, he reacts immediately, rushing to stop the attack and preventing what he foresaw from happening. He showed no mercy to Kid, because that's who Shanks is, an extremely kind dude that holds his friends close to his heart, but will devastate anyone who attacks them. So this chapter not only shows us his strength and his kindness, but it also obliterates Shanks' evil theories from here on out, pretty much, in my opinion. To tie up my thoughts on Shanks briefly, I think where Kid's real journey is just starting, Shanks' story is heading into its last arc. He'll meet his end fighting Blackbeard and will lose after triggering Blackbeard's awakening, just like we saw with Luffy and Kaido. Also, I expect a training up for both Luffy and Kid, preparing to reach the stage that Shanks, Kaido, and Big Mom were on, or are on, maybe. The final war itself could actually be triggered in a similar way to Ace's death, but instead with Shanks' death, in my opinion. it might happen earlier than people think. To summarize, I think Kid's real journey is just beginning, evidenced by a story not having any closure yet whatsoever. I think he'll go from a little kid to a big man Chad. Kid's flower Oda chose for him is a tulip, which is a flower that blossoms at the first light of spring. So, you know, if you relate that to the sun and the sort of seasonal and moon theories in One Piece, then it shows that this is the time for Kid to come back. His name is literally Kid, denoting how his character is juvenile. I think Kid will come back after his defeat, but his epithet of captain will become more relevant, like it will hold more meaning. To finish off, I hope I changed your mind at least a little bit about Kid basically not being a total waste of space, and Shanks, unfortunately, probably ending earlier than we think. So yeah, enjoy him while you can. Upcoming, we have both the Moon Theory and the Old Hag Theory I was talking about before. Like and give it a share, and if you made it this far, you've just won a week-long vacation in the Undersea Hotel Impel Down. Let me know what floor you'd like in the comments. Kid will outlive Shanks. Peace! The Emerald City has only been mentioned once in the story of One Piece, but I think I may have figured out why. I believe it was once part of the Ancient Kingdom, and that's why it only exists in legends. And trust me when I say this Emerald City is not what you think and has no relation to the Wizard of Oz, but it does have to do with a different classic published by DC Comics and the movie The Green Lantern. In fact, I think the OP world ties also into the Matrix in some weird ways too. Just keep all that in mind for now, and I'll touch on it later. Now let's get started on something I'm almost positive you've never heard before. Before Roger died, he spent his last voyage with Odin and the rest of his loyal crew looking for the truth of the world to turn it upside down. That's one of the first things he said to Rayleigh when they met. I don't know what he meant by it exactly, but I assume he meant it in a way to fix the world because something was wrong with it, as the world itself has become something it was not meant to be, or at least not what it used to be. It's as if it's all just Roger's instinct, or a fragment of a memory that was passed down to him through someone else's will. I think that's a common instinct for the D-Clan. It's like they long for freedom and the destruction of the current system the world has in place. They instinctively know something is very wrong. Think of Roger, or better yet Luffy, like Neo in The Matrix, where Morpheus tried to explain it. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It's this feeling that brought you to me. It's that same feeling that most likely drove many pirates out to sea as well in One Piece. Does this all mean that the D-Clan and everyone else are like the slaves of the system, born into the world but instinctively knowing something's missing? Are Emu, Cypher Pole, and the world government like the machines and agents that keep them enslaved? Is that why Luffy longs to be free? There has to be something going on like this, because in my honest opinion, Luffy is already free. He does whatever he wants, whenever he wants, so why does he want to become the most free so badly, if he's not imprisoned or enslaved in some way? I mean, he literally has the Nika fruit, which saves others from slavery. And maybe eating devil fruits is like when Neo learned Kung Fu or Trinity learned how to operate a helicopter. What if devil fruits are just a download of data to the personal computer that is your mind? Could their reality be a simulation? A place that runs on what we can tap into, like the Matrix? Or maybe a little bit of both? I believe it's more like the world has been divided, not only by the Red Line, but also by erasing the existence of entire kingdoms, islands, and people by locking them into different dimensions around the world. Only the different races and kingdoms that separate them to the Void Century, like Fishman Island, Zoe, and Wano, for example. Places that are very hard to reach and are surrounded in mystery, you could say. What if they had no choice? Because if they had not done it, they might have ended up somewhere much worse. If one of the main goals of the Celestial Dragons was to segregate all the races on the planet and to create a hierarchy where they could rule at the top, then they certainly accomplished that goal. So potentially everyone is locked inside the dimension of a simulated world, and the Ancient Kingdom exists inside the real world. That's why Enel can breathe on the moon, and why the Celestial Dragons insist they created this world. Because they did create it, with very ancient technology. We've also seen something similar with Film Red and the idea of like people being inside the dream while others are outside the dream, and connecting between the two. But going back to the point, the world was programmed to function that way, but at some point they lost the ability to change the code, and that's why they need the Mother Flame. The people are real, but the world around them is simulated. Maybe the Void Century was just a massive reboot of the system, and that's how all the information was lost. And maybe the poneglyphs are a part of the code for that system. And from Parvision's theory, it could have been called the White Sky Century. So what if that's
because it was literally a blank slate because of some glitch. Shout out to Parvision, of course, links in the script. I do cover some other thoughts around this idea in an old video on Denden Kushi, which is the like inherited will as a cycle, and this script idea as well. We've already seen different dimensions with devil fruit powers, like Brulee's mirror dimension and the dimension between doors with Bueno. If Brulee died while Luffy or anyone else was stuck in there, then there's no way to get free. And even if someone else eats the same devil fruit later, it's possible that they would be in control of a different dimension, mirror dimension entirely, just like how we see Boa Hancock and the way her fruit works. If she died, then no one could free those turned to stone as far as we know. So here's where it all comes together and gets very crazy. Now that I've explained why I think the world is made up of at least 2 dimensions or multi-dimensions, we can get into the juiciest stuff. Ever since we met Vegapunk on Egghead, there's been talk of dimensions, uploading data to punk records from their mind and wishing things into existence, for example. It already sounds so much like the Matrix, but what is actually real here? Because when York eats for everyone, it seems to fill up the other satellites virtually. They're not really full, but the signals in their brain tell them they are. Obviously that is relevant now because they've got her captured, so she might be able to control them in some way through that. So ultimately the point I'm making is that York and the other satellites, or the other satellites particularly, it's like a video game. They're just eating when it says they're hungry and it restores their energy. They're not actually gaining any physical substance from it. It's like if you're in VR, you're not really eating anything at all, and the food can just pop out of thin air by clicking a button on the menu. So I mean, we have this literally in Egghead with Vegapunk's vending machine and the hamburgers and stuff like that. Maybe the food was never real. Maybe it was just, you know, like some form of simulation or hologram that they could eat and they get energy from, similar to how the other satellites do it. And all of this would also fit what Luffy said to Kaido: I want to make this world a place where everyone can eat as much as they want. And if Roger and his crew found out they were living in a simulation, I don't blame them for just laughing until they cried. How would they even begin to fix that problem? To take it even further, if the ancient technology was actually an AI, but what if it pulled information from our world's history to create the simulated world in One Piece? Then it could be made up of nearly every religion, fairy tale, and myth that ever existed, which would explain a lot of the parallels between the Blue Planet and our world. And that would really connect our world with the One Piece world even further and eventually lead to breaking down the fourth wall, which is literally what we're seeing with Luffy, right? Like with his ability. And then that would satisfy the line Kaido said about Luffy popping out of the picture book. I'm not sure how I'd feel. It's going to be pretty crazy and creepy if Luffy does talk to the audience, but we have recently seen it in the live action, right? So, I don't know, maybe it's a touch from Oda that's coming. And also, what if when Oda started this story, he named the tech in Skypiea dials, because our real world internet was called dial-up in the 1990s before it was advanced, so which is when One Piece came out. Like, dials could have been some sort of the ancient kingdom's first technology, but considered an inferior version of the ancient weapons, or something like that. And just like in real life, Oda stopped using the dials and dial-up. Skypiea had tone dials, and we used to have dial tones. But yeah, that's another whole can of worms we can't get into right now. Anyway, right, now let all that sink in while I touch on the next part, and at the end it will all come together and you'll see exactly why I brought up sort of the Matrix and this idea of like a simulated state. Mindset and willpower are pretty much everything in the One Piece world, particularly in terms of energy. This is where Seraphim's blood and the Emerald City comes in. I think they all share something in common, which is the colour green. Just like in the Green Lantern, I believe the colour of will is green. It's possible there could be different colours of will, I guess, but in my theory, the strongest will is green. Maybe green is the colour, for example, of a dragon's will, which we know, like, dragons covet gold to make humans jealous, and jealousy is green. When we were first introduced to Dragon in the anime, the wind blowing through Logtown was green. Let's start with the wristbands anyway. S-Shark and the others wear. It's a device embedded in their wrists, and it turns their blood green as it circulates through them, and it's got lots of tiny bubbles. So what if Vegapunk extracted the will of a devil fruit by using Kuma's fruit, for example? Kuma could take the will straight from the person with the devil fruit power, or straight from their DNA, or just from the devil fruit itself if you wanted to, directly. This might be why the wristbands look bubbly inside. It's Kuma's little pore bubbles. They may be tiny bubbles, but bubbles all the same. He just took a tiny portion of the power so the host would not have to die. So, like, extracting some of it and putting it in someone else, which gives you this, like, bubbly look. Anyway, why do I think will is green? Well, other than the Green Lantern stuff, we also have Brook, right? His soul appears green. As we've seen many times, when it comes out of his body, it can be different forms of green. Now, why would that matter? Well, his soul is the one with the devil fruit power that contains his will. The power wasn't left in his body at all. So now we know for sure what changes when you eat a devil fruit is your soul, which holds the memories, and will, which is green, according to Brook. Even ZORO, when he fought King near the point of death, gave off the green glow. Obviously, as demon ties to death. So, and he's associated with green hair. Maybe it has something to do with him carrying a piece of Joy Boy's will too, or just because that's the color of the most powerful will. In early One Piece, we were introduced to Mihawk, the strongest character at the time. He pulled up with a strong will, a black blade, and he had a green flame on each side of him. I'm sure some of you at least have questioned why his flames were green and not red. I definitely have, but that might just be me. Green is associated with not only a strong will, but it represents life, desire, greed, energy, could be associated with the forest god. Now, what if you had a bunch of people living together in one massive kingdom with the same kind of soul power or willpower? And what if the D-Clan, with their extremely powerful will, were the rulers of the kingdom living in its capital city? A will so powerful that it changed the environment around them and gave off a green glow. Well, then I would think that their capital would be called maybe something like Emerald City, and it would probably appear emerald or glowing green. Maybe this is the entire reason the anime took such a drastic turn the last year, giving the characters extremely bright glowing auras in Wano. It was all to prepare us for the Emerald City reveal made up of the colour green and the eternal will of D. I even believe that the will of the world itself supports the D-Clan, giving them the luck of the devil, luck being green. What if the Emerald City looked similar to the planet OA from the Green Lantern? In that movie and comic, the Green Lantern Corps were mortals made up of all races. They fight evil with the aid of rings that grant them a variety of extraordinary powers, all of which come from imagination, fearlessness, and also the electromagnetic spectrum of emotional willpower, which is all green. It all sounds kind of familiar. I could even say that Trafalgar Law's secret name ties in, seeing that Green Lantern Corps was for law enforcement. Also, even if the Emerald City isn't actually green now, it could still be named that because of the past or because the colour of the Eternal Will's flame, just like how Wano is called the Country of Gold. Yet we haven't seen anything like that there, and like Wano, the Emerald City could be closed off somewhere, maybe in a different dimension, a dimension that can't be accessed without reaching Laugh Tale. A world within a world, a place where the ancient kingdom's ancestors' dreams first began and pure freedom existed. It's their home and they always want to go back, instead of the world they are trapped in now. A joyful place where all the races were welcome, ideas and technology grew without restraint, where the will of D originated and everybody just got along, I guess. And if they can tear down the walls of that dimension, the world would be in one piece again. When looking into emeralds themselves, I did find that emeralds were the true treasure real-life pirates coveted above all else. They were extremely rare and were said to hold mystical powers that granted one the power to foresee the future. But in the end, most settle for the next best thing, which would be silver, gold, and other treasure. All emeralds are made of the mineral beryl, which sounds very similar to the OP currency berry or belly. It all points to the Emerald City being the treasure at Laugh Tale. So, in other words, I used to think of Laugh Tale as being beaches made of gold, but if it was beaches made of berries, it could literally be beryl, right? It could just be beaches of emerald. With the Emerald City locked away and its purpose lost, it might be the case that the flame had to be restarted, like reborn into the world. And it started out so small that it would take at least 800 years before they could reignite the flames again, or the flame would be strong enough to do its thing. Maybe that's why in Skypiea we kept hearing, light the flames of Shandora. It's a wish or a battle cry to bring back the eternal flames of the Emerald City. Luffy will be the spark that reignites them. Think of the Emerald City as being like Punk Hazard, where a Logi awakening changed the environment, but with the colour of will instead. But then its will and its purpose was forgotten for centuries. I'm sure the world government hoped the fires would be snuffed out over time, but even then, Noland, Roger, Ace, and others carried a part of that flame, and as they died, they passed it on, and the will became stronger. Maybe that's why some of them could die with a smile on their face. So, to summarise all this, I believe the colour of will is green. Kuma is the reason the Seraphim have green blood, and Laftel is the doorway to the Emerald City, which is locked away in some sort of different dimension, like Blackbeard's Dark Dimension, for example, and it's the real treasure Roger spoke of. They just needed Joy Boy to return because he is the key, the true will of D, and that will is the eternal flame that is passed on. Thanks for sticking around. This is all 3 Days Theory. I just literally narrated it, so if I said I, it meant her. So, and then she's doing special thanks to Keb, No Chill Dill. Can't wait to hear everyone's thoughts. This is 3-day trip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and bye-bye.
The names of the GOROSEI have just been revealed after 20 plus years, but one of them in particular stands out as suspicious. Saint Jude Peter. The meaning behind the name Saint Shepherd Jude Peter is a pun for Saint Peter in the Bible and Jupiter. But how does Nerona Emu fit into this? And even Rox XEBEC? Well, we're about to find out. Saint Peter in real life was a Jew named Peter, who was crucified by Roman Emperor Nero. The name could also be a combination of Peter and Judas, both of whom were a part of Jesus' 12 apostles. There were 2 apostles named Judas, but we're talking about the one notorious for betraying him by disclosing his whereabouts for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus was then arrested, tried, and executed. There are many versions of Peter's story, but in the New Testament and 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Peter was a Jewish fisherman. His original name was actually Simon, the son of a man named Jonah, and giving up everything in his life to follow Jesus, Simon was given the new name Peter. The original name Simon in Hebrew means listening or hearing, and in Greek translation, Petros, Peter, means rock. So when you read the name Simon Peter, it literally means listening rock or hearing rock. Funny thing is, this reminds me of the time we were first introduced to the breath of all things by ZORO, when he listened to the stone, the rock, and Alabasta in his fight against Mr. One. But this could also tie into how Roger could hear the poneglyphs. Anyway, Peter was the first apostle and is described as the rock on which the church was built. He was the first leader of the early church in Rome and the first pope. This may hint at St. Jude Peter having deep ties to the foundation of the world government and potential loyalties to the Christ figure, Joy Boy. In Matthew and Mark, Jesus called Simon and his brother to be fishers of men, which in my One Piece brain ties into the name Fisher Tiger, and it fits with the power Rox and Luffy have of drawing people in and making them allies, friends and foes alike. This might even be why Oda gave him the name Shepherd. Although Peter became one of the apostles that followed Christ, he began to have doubts, and Peter denied Christ 3 times before his crucifixion, but when Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later, he confirmed his faith 3 times. This reflects Jew Peter denying Joy Boy, Fisher Tiger, and then Luffy's attempts at freeing the world. According to the New Testament, Jesus was crucified at a spot outside Jerusalem called Golgotha, which in Aramaic means place of the skull. The place of the skull in One Piece would be Onigashima. Luffy's execution was carried out by Kaido, but it was arranged by the GOROSEI and CIPHER, demonstrating another connection between the story of Peter in the Bible and Jew Peter in One Piece. Peter's execution years later was ordered by the Roman Emperor Nero, who blamed the city's Christians for a terrible fire that had ravaged Rome. He was executed in Nero's circus at the foot of Vatican Hill. We think this might shadow the God Valley incident, with Rox being betrayed by Nerona Emu. All this really makes me believe that the reason Oda gave XEBEC the surname Rox is because Rox could actually be Peter. I don't know if he just has some kind of weird connection with Rox, or Rox actually did fall into ruin at God Valley by becoming a member of the GOROSEI. It would be fitting for Emu to change Rox's name to St. Jude Peter, the complete opposite of what Jesus did. I mean, leave it to Oda to be able to name someone after the planet Jupiter, but still give him another name with such deep ties to the Bible. But in this story, Nerona Emu is an immortal version of the Roman Emperor Nero. Luffy, Joy Boy, is Jesus, or carries his will, and Rox, well, he's Peter. Rox betrayed his crew like Judas and then became the new GOROSEI member named Jupiter. Some of this probably happened hundreds of years ago, but is happening again now in the current timeline. I do have some more thoughts on Nero's circus and how I think Buggy really could be related to the House of Nerona, Emu, and Rox. Nero's circus mirrors Buggy's circus theme and his attempted execution at Logtown of Luffy. I do wonder if Buggy is actually Rox's son, and maybe that's why Rox went to God Valley. He heard of his son's birth and went back to save him, because in my opinion, Rox was from God Valley all along. That's how he knew where to find it. He must have betrayed the Celestial Dragons a couple of years earlier, gaining him the secret title of D. I would think all Rox had to his name when he first escaped was a ZEBEC, a small three-masted sailing ship, hence the name Rox D. ZEBEC. Well, anyway, guys, thank you for listening. It's just a little food for thought. I'll drop another short video soon, so make sure you're subbed and turn on your notifications. Bye-bye.
What if I told you that Bink's sake is more important than we already know, and it may tie into the name of the ancient kingdom? Hi there, I'm Straw Hat Lucas, helmsman of the last arc. Today I'm bringing you the most spiciest spice melange you've ever heard, brought to you by the courtesy of our one and only 3-day trip. So, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this theory with all your Nakama. And let's get into it. What if we already know the name of the ancient kingdom? What if I told you it's been staring us right in the face for several long years? Or months, depending on when you read One Piece. Either way, what if I told you I know why pirates love to sing about delivering Bink's sake? Would you still watch this whole video? Or would you skip to the end? First off, pirates don't deliver anything. Legally. Merchants do. So why would the lyrics in Bink's sake say that? 4 verses of the song start with the same line. Gather up all of the crew. It's time to ship out Binks's 3-day trip, and myself believe centuries ago the newly formed world government, or even before they fully formed, made it illegal to sail the seas unless you were part of the 20 allied nations, part of the navy, or a merchant ship delivering goods. Anyone else traveling the seas would be labeled criminals and called pirates, enemies of the world. And if you think about it, one of the first things Buggy D. Clown did after becoming a member of the 7 Warlords was to start a delivery service under the government's protection. So the idea is this. The D-Clan and the people of the ancient kingdom decided to brew sake and travel the world disguised as merchants delivering sake to nearby God Nika is the devil fruit. The Nika kingdom is the ancient kingdom. Brewed in Nika's kingdom. Labeled B-I-N-K-S sake. B-I-N-K. Binks. Brewed in Nika's kingdom. While Who's Who was imprisoned after Shanks stole the devil fruit he was guarding, a prison guard told him about Nika, and the same guard vanished the very next day. Who's Who was so afraid he broke out of prison to avoid being killed as well, all because he learned the legend of Sun God Nika, and that was considered taboo. And even in the current storyline, Vegapunk also knows the name Nika, and says it was wiped from history, and now Admiral Kizaru, fleet of Navy ships, and J. Garcia Saturn are on their way to erase him as well. Now, whether you guys believe this or not, that's up to you. But 3 days sold me, and she sold a lot of other people with her original post on Reddit. But once again, I'm Straw Hat Lucas, helmsman of the last arc. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and gummo no rocket that bell icon so you can keep up to date with all of our latest One Piece theories. And we'll see you in the next one. Ho ho, yo ho ho ho. Yo ho ho, yo ho ho ho. Gather up all of the crew, it's time to ship out Binks's brew. Pirates, we eternally are challenging the sea. With the waves to rest our heads, ship beneath us as our beds. Hoisted high upon the mast, our Jolly Roger flies. Roanoa Zoro, the demon, pirate hunter, first mate, wing of the pirate king. Big-chested himbo, and the opposite of a GPS. Whichever of these you refer to him as, we all know and love this moss-head swordsman. Over the course of the series, We've watched Zoro grow stronger and stronger, overcoming odds and enemies alike. But what drives him? Is it his dream of being the greatest swordsman the world's ever known? His promise to Kuina? Making Luffy king of the pirates? Well, what if I told you that, yes, it is all of that. But there's something underneath. Something more to this beautiful man than just being a badass who wields 3 swords. And that is fear. I'm Straw Hat Lucas, helmsman of the last arc. And make sure to like, subscribe, and red rock that bell icon to get all the One Piece content we got. Ready? Let's go. Now, before we get into this, I will say I was heavily inspired to make this analysis after watching Melon Tree's video, Zoro and the Anxiety of Strength, which I will link to in the description. You should also hit the subscribe button for her as well. Now, let's start with Zoro's childhood, and before we ever get to the flashback that Oda-sensei graced us with, about Zoro's dedication to learning 3 sword style and his friendship with Kuina, we know that Zoro lost his mother to an unknown illness and his father to pirates. Throughout this video, I'm going to ask you to picture situations through the eyes of Zoro, and this is the perfect place to start. Imagine that you're a child. Your mother has already passed, and then the one person you have left, your father, is taken out by pirates. Now you're alone. You don't know what to do. You don't know which way to go. Now there is some speculation here because we don't know when exactly Zoro's parents died, but let's assume his father getting killed by pirates is what led him to Koshiro's academy. He would have gone scared, but driven, determined to become a swordsman. Then, when he gets there, he is faced with another roadblock, Kuina. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail about his relationship with the Kuina, because I'm sure we all know it well, but to summarize, Zoro met Kuina, Zoro challenged Kuina, Kuina beat Zoro an ungodly amount of times, and on the night that they finally used real swords, that's when Kuina and Zoro bond deeply. They learn they share the same dream. Then it happens. Now, what I want to focus on about Kuina's death is Zoro's reaction. Obviously, he cries and is upset, but looking deeper with the knowledge of what happened to his parents, this kid is clearly traumatized. He suffered 3 majors' death in his life in what we can assume is a very short amount of time. He's 11 in the flashback with Kuina. Even if his parents passed a year or 2 beforehand, even 3 years, that is still a close time period in his short life to lose so much. This is logically where the seed of his fear starts, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's jump forward a bit. Picture this. You're tied up on a cross in the middle of a marine base, and the next thing you know, a weird kid wearing sandals shows up and asks you, a well-known bounty hunter, to be his crewmate. You pass him off, and he decides he's going to get your swords back in exchange for your companionship. Then, surprisingly, he's there, 3 swords in hand, and stretching, his limbs like rubber, while beating the ever-loving Brown out of the Marines. Your first thought would be, who the hell is this guy? And your second thought would be, how in the world is he stretching? So what do? Well, you join him. You and that stretchy-armed man set out to sea. Let's move on to the first fight Zoro really has in the series, Kabaji. Now, I won't lie. Compared to the later fights in the series, Zoro basically hands Kabaji his own ass on a silver platter. It isn't until Surf Village we see Zoro struggle with an enemy, or enemies, Sham and Bochi. I'm not going to say that he beat the brakes off of him, but they did give him a run for his money for a moment. Think about it. Here you are, fresh off your first major victory in Orangetown. Then bam, 2 dudes with a combined bounty of 7 million start pushing you back, more so than you thought they would. That's when a familiar feeling starts welling up in you. So you push yourself through, you push yourself harder and win the fight. Moving past Surf Village, we get to the next major loss of Zoro's life. The fight against Mihawk at Baradier. To say Mihawk utterly destroyed Zoro's ability and pride is putting it lightly. Using the smallest knife we've seen in the series so far, he made a mockery of Zoro's abilities, showing Zoro just how far he has to go in the process. Imagine this. You're setting sail with your captain, gathering crew members, you've had a few tough fights, but you've come out every time on top. Then you see it. Your goal is right in front of you, and you realize just how large of an ambition it is. Just how much you have to work to do it. It seems impossible. You've lost to someone you can't even see because they are so far ahead of you. You are at a loss. And loss. That's what Zoro fears most in the entire world. Loss of found family, loss of pride, and loss of ambition. With that established, let me show you exactly how it drives him. Luckily, I won't go as long-winded with this half of the video because there are really only 2 examples I need to explain to you how it drives him. While making our way through Arlong Park, Alabasta, Skypiea, and Eni's Lobby, we see minor examples of his drives, such as scenes of Zoro reaching new heights by overcoming Hachi, learning new techniques while fighting Mr. One, saving Chopper from Ohm and Skypiea, and all of these can tie back to those 3 types of lost Zoro fears. But the first major example we need to talk about happens on Thriller Bark. I think we all know what's next. There you are, exhausted, after fighting all night long against waves of zombies, ghosts, and a warlord straight from a nightmare. The man you respect the most, your captain, is exhausted beyond belief. Your crew's exhausted beyond belief, and now here stands another warlord, Bartholomew Kuma. You and your crew attack him, but your attacks refuse to penetrate. It's like he's a cyborg, like your shipwright. Then he unleashes an attack that knocks out everyone. Even you are knocked down. You watch as he reaches for your captain, and you feel it, the loss creeping up inside you. You can't let that happen. Not again. So you offer the tyrant your head instead. The cook tries to offer his, but you knock him out. You can't change your mind. Your fear of losing your family again has settled it for you. You'd sacrifice it all so you don't have to feel that again, and so they don't have to feel that. And then nothing happened. Zoro was ready to lay his life on the line. No, his ambitions. His and Kuina's dream on the line to protect his Nakama and to save them from feeling that loss. After all of that, we arrive on Sabaody, and once again, by the hands of Bartholomew Kuma, Zoro faces loss. His crew is gone, possibly dead, and he's on a strange island. At first, he assumes everything will be fine. He will just meet the crew back at the Sunny in 3 days. He runs into Perona and attempts to leave. Then the man who lives on this island returns. Dracule Mihawk. What is it that Mihawk tells Zoro right as he arrives? Straw Hat Luffy has lost his brother in the War of the Best. Ace is dead. Luffy suffered the greatest loss possible, and Zoro wasn't there to stop it. He wasn't there to help Luffy, and Luffy suffered because of it. Because of loss. This drives Zoro to beg on hand and knee for Mihawk to train him. In the post-time skip, I feel Zoro continues to be driven by this fear, but he's more subtle about it. We all know how stoic he got in those 2 years, and I believe he is hiding his fear in a way that it only cracks through on occasion, like on Punk Hazard when he reminds Luffy that they're in the new world now and that he cannot lose. In all honesty, I think by the time they hit the new world, Zoro had learned to live with his fear, to accept it, but at the same time he has become more reckless when it comes to protecting his crew. He doesn't fear death, he only fears his crew feeling loss, the loss he has known his whole life. Whoa! This turned out way longer than I expected it would. This is my first long-form video, so if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Here's a reminder to go check out Melon Tree's video in the description, and don't forget to subscribe to The Last Arc, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Psst. Also, I have a TikTok that you can go follow me on. It's @StrawHatLucas with an underscore between straw and hat. Let's go.